Welcome to meeting number 34 of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. Before we begin, I'd like to ask all in-person participants to read the guidelines written on the updated cards on the table in front of you. They are measures in place to prevent feedback incidents and protect the health and safety of all participants, including and especially our interpreters. You'll notice there's a QR code on the card. It links to a short awareness video. Please wait until I recognize you by name before we speak. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Finally, the clerk distributed 2 operational budgets, one to cover for extra meals for our study on the state of journalism and media sectors, and one for the meeting with the minister on the main estimates. Will you move it? Moved by Ms. Royer. Anybody opposed? All right, passed. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, September 22nd, 2025, the committee is meeting to study the state of the journalism and media sectors. We have 2 new members joining us today, Ms. Tatiana Auguste and Ms. Alana Hurdle. Welcome to Heritage Committee. It's good to have you. And we have with us, I think, everybody in the room today, and all, I think, have witnessed at this committee before. Krista Dickinson from CPAC, the Cable Public Affairs Channel, is with us here in the room. We have Kevin Desjardins, President of the Canadian Association of Broadcasters. Welcome, sir. We have Jeff Thiessen from the Miracle Channel Association. We have Barry Rook, Executive Director of the National Campus and Community Radio Association. Good to see you again. And Amir Epstein, Chief Executive Officer from TAFSIC Organization. Welcome to everyone. You will have each 5 minutes for opening statements before I turn it over to committee members for questioning. And we'll start with CPAC. Krista Dickinson, you have the floor, ma'am, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. My name is Krista Dickinson. I am the President and Chief Executive Officer of CPAC, the Cable Public Affairs Channel. Thank you, first of all, for inviting CPAC to speak to this important study. The issues before this committee are immediate and deeply consequential. As the members know, last week, CPAC made a difficult decision to eliminate our 2 flagship programs and proceed with layoffs, affecting a totality of 15% of our staff. This incredibly difficult step was necessary for CPAC. CPAC is an independent, not-for-profit, commercial-free, bilingual media organization focused on Canadian politics and public affairs. CPAC
is a non-profit public service. It is not a business. We do not produce opinion programs. Our mission is simple: to provide comprehensive, unfiltered, and impartial access to Canada's democratic institutions in both official languages.
As viewing habits changed, we evolved. Today, CPAC provides up to 14 simultaneous live streams online, including coverage of media availability, scrums, caucus activity, and major announcements, in addition to the televised parliamentary programming. Further, CPAC hosts an archive of over 70,000 hours of political and public affairs programming, and that is dating back to 1977. Canadians know they can rely on us for the complete story, as do Canada's journalists. Veteran parliamentary reporter Bob Fife wrote to us recently, right after we announced our cuts. CPAC, he said, is an indispensable service for all of us. Without access to the media events that you cover, it would be a real challenge for us to do our jobs properly, end of quote. However, CPAC is operating underneath significant and growing financial strain. We do not receive ongoing government funding. Further, our CRTC conditions of service dictate that we are not permitted to sell advertising, and this is key to ensure we maintain our neutrality. CPAC's main source of ongoing revenue by far is the CRTC mandated wholesale fee we receive from cable and satellite customers. But this funding model is eroding faster than anticipated. As Canadians cut the cord, revenues decline, even as demand for online access grows. Recognizing the strain CPAC is under, the CRTC recently approved a 3-cent rate increase for CPAC, which will come into effect this September. This increase is critical for CPAC in the short term, but it is not, and nor is it intended to be, a long-term solution. This study examines the transformation of Canada's media landscape. Traditional revenues are eroding, digital platforms are rising, and the fiscal and regulatory framework is struggling to keep pace. CPAC and others have advocated to the CRTC to establish a Service of Exceptional Importance Fund. The fund would see streaming services contribute to certain public interest services like CPAC in a way that is similar to what cable and satellite providers do today.
This approach would recognize the growing importance of online access to reliable and comprehensive information for Canadians. It would also recognize that online services must, in turn, contribute to the broadcasting system and to important public services such as CPAC, which are made possible by that system.
Without a stable and sustainable fiscal and funding framework, services like CPAC and news content and other broadcast media will continue to contract, if not disappear. And when they do, our democracy will feel the impact: fewer cameras, less coverage, less visibility, and how decisions are made. Your study is an opportunity to address that, to preserve Canadian media and journalism, its independence, its impartiality, its role in supporting our democratic and cultural sovereignty. There is no substitute for what CPAC does. It is a public good. And like many public goods, it requires thoughtful, timely policy to support to endure. With that, I look forward to your questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Oh, they were very upsetting. It was very upsetting to hear about those layoffs from CPAC, but thank you for describing for us the landscape behind it. We'll move now to Kevin Desjardins from the Canadian Association of Broadcasters. You have the floor, sir, for 5 minutes.
Am I on? Thank you, Madame la Présidente. Bon matin, tout le monde.
Good morning, everyone. I am Kevin Desjardins, and I am the president of the Canadian Association of Broadcasters. We represent commercial broadcasters nationwide, including radio, television, and specialized services. We have 77 owner groups with 797 stations and services across the country. You have had the opportunity to hear from several members of our association during your study, and 2 of them are here today. In these presentations, you have heard a number of times that journalism is an essential part of the work they do in the service of their communities. But you have also heard that support is needed so that they can continue to provide this fundamental democratic service.
Radio and television broadcasters remain a cornerstone of Canada's news ecosystem. Our members provide trusted professional journalism to millions of Canadians on radio and television stations across the country, as well as through their online services and news portals. Broadcasters are relied upon by Canadians as their primary and most trusted source for news in communities of all sizes and in all regions. Private broadcasters also spend more than $680 million in news programming, the vast majority of which is invested in journalists, in newsrooms, and reporting in their communities. That's significantly more than any other players across the news sectors, including the CBC. The challenge for Canada's broadcast newsrooms is not one of reach or relevance or trust or value. The largest challenge in supporting newsrooms in Canada is the fact that 2 of the most important market-based supports for journalism have been undermined by foreign online giants. On the advertising side, we see that 75% of Canadian ad dollars are now flowing to foreign digital platforms. That's 11.2 billion Canadian dollars leaving our economy every year. And on the subscription side, cord cutting of Canadian cable and satellite services in favor of foreign online streaming giants means a further $5 billion in Canadian dollars leaving our domestic media sector. The foreign streamers themselves estimate that this figure will hit $10 billion in the near future. What we effectively have is a trade deficit in our media industry, and the first places to feel the squeeze are Canada's newsrooms. All news producers face declining advertising revenues, disruption from global media behemoths, and rising production costs. Moreover, while the challenges faced by news producers, whether print, digital first, or broadcast media are the same, existing direct funding mechanisms largely exclude commercial broadcasters. This is why the CAB recommends the following 3 measures be undertaken to help keep journalists in newsrooms across Canada. 1, provide emergency support to local independent television stations. 2, extend the Canadian Journalism Labour Tax Credit to broadcasters. And 3, devote 70% of the government's ad budget to Canadian media companies. On the first item, you've heard from several recipients of the Independent Local News Fund on the immediate issue they face, and as an appeal by global streamers has delayed new money flowing into this important fund. It should be underlined that the core of the streamers' argument to the Federal Court of Appeal is that they don't do news, so they shouldn't have to support it. While this shortfall in funds may be a temporary issue, the consequences of delays could be permanent with newsroom cuts and more stations closing. Secondly, we think that it is a matter of basic fairness that the Government of Canada to rethink the Journalism Labour Tax Credit. Its current application exclusively to print media fails to recognize the reality of news media in Canada. Whatever their origins as an outlet, many print media typically also provide audio and video content now, and broadcasters create text-based news content through their websites and portals. And third, it is vital that policies with respect to government advertising be addressed. The Government of Canada continues to disproportionately place the bulk of its advertising on digital platforms, 2/3 of the government ad spend, with the majority of that going to foreign-owned platforms. Dedicating 70% of the Government of Canada's advertising revenues to our domestic radio, TV, print, and Canadian-owned digital media will not only help to reverse this trend, but will benefit the government by positioning its messages alongside trusted sources of national and local news. Finally, Canada must reject any attempt to treat our media sovereignty as a bargaining chip in the ongoing review of CUSMA. The Online Streaming Act does not fit any good faith definition of a non-tariff trade barrier. And as I've already mentioned, foreign platforms have abundant access to the Canadian market. In fact, foreign-owned digital media platforms continue to enjoy an easier path to accessing the Canadian market than regulated Canadian broadcasters. Merci de votre...
Thank you for your attention. I look forward to answering your questions.
Très bien, merci.
Thank you.
Ensuite, je donne la parole à...
Now, Jeff Thiessen, the Miracle Channel Association.
5 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today on behalf of the Miracle Channel Association, now using MCA Media Group to identify ourselves as we've grown. We are an independent local broadcaster based in Lethbridge, Alberta, and a proud member of the local independent television stations, the Litz Group. MCA Media produces and broadcasts high-quality, locally relevant news and programming that serves Southern Alberta, including positive content television through Miracle Channel and our expanding digital platforms. Our remarks align with those of our Litz colleagues who have already appeared before this committee. Litz stations like ours serve around 4 million Canadians and over 10% of the population in some of the country's smallest and most underserved television markets. Yet we're operating under extreme financial pressure. This is why emergency bridge funding for the Independent Local News Fund, the ILNF, is our immediate priority. MCA Media has been hit particularly hard by recent CRTC decisions. We are executing on a plan that included funding from streamer contributions to the ILNF, obligations the Commission imposed under the Online Streaming Act, Bill C-11. Over the last 4 years, we invested heavily in good faith, increasing our local news and exceeding our conditions of license. We expected that additional funding to arrive in August 2025. Instead, our allocation was cut by 43% when the Commission prematurely added Chorus. Overall, MCA Media's funding from the ILNF has fallen 72% since 2017, the opposite of what was supposed to happen. In the meantime, larger ILNF stations have generously allowed smaller operators like us to borrow funds just to manage cash flow. If the appeals court does not uphold the CRTC decision to support local news for small markets, it will be devastating. Not only will small stations lose the additional funding everyone planned for, but will also have to repay those loans. This uncertainty has left us in dire circumstances. Employees have left and we have not replaced them. We have job openings and want to hire more journalists, but we simply do not have the money. It's hard to remain entrepreneurial and maximize every opportunity to serve our communities when public policy works in theory but fails in practice. If a key goal of the ILNF is to support local news in underserved markets, the current situation is having the opposite effect. We also note the ongoing failure of the Online News Act to deliver anticipated compensation from dominant platforms. LITS has formally applied to the CRTC to commence bargaining with Meta, providing unequivocal evidence that Meta's supposed news ban is a charade. This underscores the Act's critical importance for independent local broadcasters. We note the Heritage Minister's recent comments expressing disappointment that the CRTC is not moving faster to implement the Online Streaming Act. The reality is we are 2 decades late, not just a year. This continued delay directly harms local broadcasters required to meet strict Canadian content quotas, while foreign streamers capture audience and revenue with minimal obligations. On government advertising, my colleague Raj Fain was bang on. Broadcasters are required to meet rigorous Canadian content requirements. Shouldn't the government that imposes those requirements on us match it with their own advertising spend? We also call for closing the advertising loophole that allows foreign digital platforms to siphon revenue without equivalent regulatory or content obligations. Regarding innovation, independent local broadcasters like MCA have invested heavily in digital transformation, new platforms, and audience engagement. We meet and long exceeded online distribution requirements while maintaining local routes and public service mandates in smaller communities. In closing, we support greater transparency in funding programs. Broadcast programs like the ILNF already include robust reporting requirements. Madam Chair, the survival of independent local television is not just an industry issue. It is a democratic imperative. Canadians in every region, especially in smaller markets served by stations like MCA Media, deserve reliable, locally produced news and information. We stand ready to work with this committee and the government to deliver the urgent measures needed. Thank you. Look forward to the questions.
Thank you. Good to see more Lethbridge in the room here. Turning to Barry Rook, National Campus and Community Radio Association. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation to appear. My name's Barry Rook. I'm the Executive Director of the National Campus and Community Radio Association since 2015. I started my broadcasting career at the age of 15, volunteering at one of our member stations located in Guelph. Working in the community radio sector has had a profound impact on how I see the world and how I act within it. The NCRA represents over 120 English, campus, community, and Indigenous not-for-profit radio stations, serving more than 100 communities across Canada, broadcasting in over 55 languages. Our entire sector is powered by approximately 900 staff, with more than 23,000 volunteers, contributing the equivalent of over $40 million annually in volunteer labor, and much more through advertising and music. We are a national system of local media, deeply embedded in the communities we serve. Our member stations are often the only source of local information, whether it's in a rural town, on a campus, or on an Indigenous reserve. Community radio is not a legacy system in decline. It's a system that has adapted. Our stations have expanded into digital streaming, podcasting, and social platforms while maintaining accessible over-the-air broadcasting, which provides local journalism, cultural programming, and emergency broadcasting. Again, often in areas where commercial broadcasters have reduced service or exited entirely. In fact, I receive inquiries to start a station at least once a month, and we currently have a dozen or so stations that intend to apply for CRTC licenses this year. Despite this, the policy and funding environment has not kept pace with the role we now play. There is a structural gap in support for local journalism delivered through community broadcasters. Programs designed to support journalism under Bill C-18, the Online News Act in 2022, have not been built with our model in mind. As a result, many of our stations, despite producing news and spoken word content under CRTC requirements, have been excluded from funding and had their social media platforms blocked, not just their ability to share news. While the CRTC has recognized the need for sector support through the Online Streaming Act, implementation of those efforts has faced ongoing legal and structural challenges and has not resulted in any funding becoming available. At the same time, we're seeing a continued contraction of commercial broadcasters in local journalism, as well as the closures of broadcasting and journalism schools across the country. Finally, the economics of media have shifted dramatically. Advertising revenues have moved away from local markets. Community broadcasters who reinvest directly in local services are left out without sustainable funding model to match their public service role. By not advertising on our stations, governments are missing out on reaching millions of people who don't have access to other local media. Our proposed solution follows the model in Australia, a small amount of core stable funding that allows the sector to do what it does best, serve the community. In Australia, the government has allocated $20 million to community broadcasters and $20 million to Aboriginal broadcasters over the past 15 years. This means a country with 2/3 the population is close to double the number of nonprofit stations and does have a thriving local media sector. Our solution is the Community Radio Initiative. We are seeking an annual investment of $30 million, which would result in about $95,000 per station, additional top-up funding for special projects, and an annual sector survey and report to ensure the money invested is providing the value it expects to the Canadian public. In practical terms, the level of funding is modest. It supports a mix of staffing and operations that keep stations on the air, and the ability to provide consistent local news, emergency information, and essential connections to community services, local business, and public programs. We respectfully ask that this committee include a clear recommendation in its report to fund the Community Radio Initiative and to transmit that recommendation to the Minister of Finance and the Standing Committee on Finance as part of the upcoming budget process. I can say for certain that many of your colleagues in this room and within your party have found their paths to becoming an MP through one of our stations. I'm asking you for your support to ensure the media sector remains stable so it can do its part in Canada's democratic processes. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, we'll turn to Amir Epstein from the TAFSIC organization. Welcome, sir. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Amir Epstein. I am the Chief Executive Officer of TAFSIC organization, one of the fastest growing Jewish organizations in Canada. The explosion of anti-Semitism we are witnessing across Canada today is not an accident, it's not spontaneous, and it's not happening in isolation. It is being fed, shaped, and normalized by the information Canadians consume every single day. That includes our schools, our universities, and absolutely includes the CBC, our main national public broadcaster. The CBC are not a fringe outlet, they're not a blog, they're a taxpayer-funded national institution in the tune of over $1 billion that Canadians are told they can trust. When that power is exercised carelessly, when unverified claims are amplified, when biased sources are relied upon, when narratives are presented without proper scrutiny, the consequences are not theoretical, they're societal, and they are measurable. When the CBC amplifies claims from terrorist sources without any verification or context, it is not simply reporting, it is acting as a conduit for narratives that are designed to promote hate and violence against my Jewish community. The most glaring example of this was reported on the Al-Ahli hospital explosion in Gaza in 2023. Within minutes, claims originating from Hamas, a designated terrorist organization that murdered my people, spread across Canada by the CBC that Israel had bombed the hospital, killed hundreds of civilians. Well, it was all a lie. The explosion was caused by a misfired rocket launched from Gaza, but by then the damage was already done. Millions of Canadians will forever believe that lie, that Israel had bombed that hospital. When those narratives portray the only Jewish state, and by extension Jews in Canada, as uniquely immoral or violent, they reinforce deep-rooted and dangerous patterns of hate. This is how modern anti-Semitism operates, in the form of anti-Zionism, and it is repackaged through the language of politics and activism. But the structure remains the same, the singling out, the demonization, and the application of double standards. Classic anti-Semitism has largely been associated with the far right, including the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists, relying on blood libels and tropes that Jews control governments and manipulate society to justify hatred for the Jewish community. Well, today anti-Zionism has become a modern vehicle for the same hatred. It emerges from segments of the far left and Islamist movements using similar falsehoods reframed to claim that Israel and Zionists control global affairs or commit genocide and apartheid, lies that some politicians like Olivia Chow have accepted to justify hostility towards Jews. We have seen narratives from Hamas, its proxy UNRWA, and the United Nations, as well as Al Jazeera, the government of Qatar, and the Islamic regime in Iran, amplified without level of scrutiny expected from a publicly funded broadcaster. This is not journalism at the highest standard, nor is it journalism at the most basic level. The CBC is acting as a mouthpiece for narratives by terrorist entities, something that would have been unfathomable 20 years ago. Media does not just inform, it conditions Canadian attitudes. The CBC tells audience who deserves sympathy, who deserves skepticism, who deserves blame. Hindus being attacked by Khalistanis? Who cares? Over 100 churches being burned to the ground? Who cares? They choose what is newsworthy and what isn't based on their own biases. We are now seeing those attitudes manifest here in Canada. Jewish students facing hostility on campuses, while synagogues, Jewish schools, and Jewish-owned restaurants are being shot at repeatedly. The CBC elevates fringe anti-Zionist Jewish voices to represent the broader Canadian Jewish community when they actually only represent themselves. This creates a distorted picture for Canadians. The vast majority of Jews in Canada and worldwide believe in the right to self-determination in our ancestral homeland, just as every culture in the world should. Anyone claiming to speak as a Jew while denying that right is detached from Jewish history and reality. When the CBC platforms those voices, it reinforces false narratives about Israel and the Jewish people, contributing to a climate of hostility, rising anti-Semitism, and anti-Zionism. A publicly funded broadcaster must reflect reality and not shape it selectively. This is not about silencing criticism of Israel, as its government can and should be scrutinized, but scrutiny must be grounded in facts and applied consistently to every nation. The CBC helps shape how millions of Canadians understand the world, and in this case, it is contributing to an environment where anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is increasingly normalized. This is about whether Jewish Canadians can live openly and safely, whether students can walk on campuses without fear, whether families can attend synagogue without security, or whether children feel safe wearing a Star of David without being suspended for anti-Palestinian racism, the latest fabricated tool to extinguish Jewish identity. When trusted institutions fuel narratives that lead to suspicion and dehumanization, they are no longer observers. They have become part of the environment in which that hatred grows. The cost of getting this wrong is measured in the safety, dignity, and future of Canadian Jews. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now turn the floor over to questions from members, starting with Mrs. Thomas for 6 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, and thank you to each and every one of you for being here. My first question is going to go to Mrs. Dickinson. The CPAC went to the Board of Internal Economy, and during its time there, the following statement was made. At a time when legacy media companies continue to cut back their news operations and increasingly substitute opinion-driven journalism for in-depth reporting, CPAC is alone among Canadian broadcasters in providing live, uncut, neutral, and unfiltered coverage. You make a distinction between opinion-driven journalism and in-depth reporting. I'm wondering if you would care to expand on that or describe what you mean by those two things today.
Sure. You know, the media journalistic landscape includes the public broadcaster and not-for-profit organizations, and they all have different mandates. What's absolutely unique about CPAC is that instead of just being able to see a soundbite that goes into a story, you have the full coverage of the event where the soundbite took place. And that is what we mean about it. So, for instance, that it be, you know, the above and beyond parliamentary proceedings and press conferences and taking a soundbite, we go to events such as the convention, all political party conventions, and we will be there to cover it. Anything that's public facing, we will cover it in its entirety. Similarly, I always think about, for instance, an example such as the Assembly of First Nations and their annual General Assembly. We're there for it in its entirety. Even APTN, who's there to provide community-based information for the Indigenous people, about the Indigenous people, will only do a news story. That's what I mean by that.
So I guess for further clarification, what do you mean by opinion-based journalism?
Opinion-based journalism is when one, continues to ask very, very rooted questions with one lens and one focus versus looking at a wide array of opinions.
Further clarification, can you give an example of what that would look like?
I think that we see it every single day in the news that's coming to us, specifically foreign news, the American news that is overtaking our, les ondes broadcast. That's what I would look at.
Okay, so that's looking south of the border, but you're talking within a Canadian context that there seems to be opinion-based journalism here. Would you give an example of that?
I don't have a specific example that's coming to mind. I just think that a lot of the other broadcasters do go down that road.
Okay. I can see your hesitancy to give an example. It was a phrase that was used in front of the Board of Internal Economy. Obviously, there is a distinction being drawn between what CPAC offers and what other media outlets offer. You don't care to expand on that?
At the end of the day is, that it be political parties or other journalists, when they're looking for the whole clip that's been unedited, they come to CPAC versus choosing a piece of the story. That is really, truly what I mean by that statement.
Right. Fair enough. My next question is for Jeff. Mr. Thiessen, I guess I'm curious if you can expand on the unique challenges that are faced by a local, small, independent media outlet, in particular when it comes to providing coverage that would pertain specifically to a community and making sure that diversity in that area is represented, or that voice, I should say, is represented.
Thank you. One of the challenges, obviously, is funding. To get every side of the story, it's really important that we have enough resources to get to the story. So I think that's one of the challenges small markets have, is that there is always a limited pool of resources that way. When it comes to diversity, that's one thing we've really pride ourselves on in our organization. We try to get at all sides of the story, and I appreciate some of the things that have been talked about already this morning. Southern Alberta is unique, and we talked about Lethbridge. Lethbridge is a great city because it really has so many diverse opinions, and it's a pleasure to be able to, allow our organization, our news team, to dig into a city that has a very strong university presence as well as a strong agriculture. Some of them from very different political spectrums. So, it's a great opportunity, a great ecosystem to develop journalism and make sure that the standards are really well maintained. So, it's a fun city to be covering.
So, sorry, just to tap further into my question, though, I guess I'm curious as to, why is that important? Why do you need boots on the ground in local communities?
I think when it comes, in my speech, I talk about democracy, and you have to be able to explain what's the real story, what's the heart of the story, and that only comes from digging in and finding out what's really going on. So I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm really answering your question on that, but I can tell you the concern we have as a local station is that without the resources, we're just not able to cover stories the way we would like to, whether it's in the courthouse appearances or other things that really the community really wants to hear about, or making sure that everyone has a voice to be heard.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Thiessen.
Turn the floor now to Mr. Al Sood for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great to see you as always. And my turn to very warmly welcome our two new committee members. I know the people of Cumberland, Colchester, as well as Terrebonne will be very, very well represented over the context of all that we do here in Heritage. I have the privilege of representing various perspectives in this committee. I am the youngest Arab, the youngest Muslim, and the first Canadian of Palestinian origin to serve in this beautiful House of Commons. My mother's side of her family, following 1948, the Nakba, was completely pushed out to Lebanon. I say completely pushed out, they actually had to flee. My entire family's lives, they have had to convince people that their story, a story that is often understood by many, many others, but that is refuted by so many others in other contexts. Everybody here has a story, and their stories are assumed in most contexts. My family's is not. Countless Palestinians around the world have to convince people day in, day out that the atrocities that they face, that the things that they live day in, day out are not okay. And that in itself is a form of anti-Palestinian racism. Hospitals have been bombed over the past few years. And it's not just the past few years, it is so much beyond that. The entirety of Gaza is destroyed and at this point eradicated. Tens of thousands of Palestinians have been murdered. And we stand here and we still have to convince and convey that that is worthy of coverage. We have to convey that that is something that deserves to be covered by the CBC. And so I will now turn to my questions, but I thought that was worth a comment at the very least. Mr. Rook, you started in campus and community radio at the age of 15, when you were introduced at the CFRU at the University of Guelph. If a 15-year-old today wanted to enter radio or local journalism, would the pathway still exist in the same way?
So the pathways from and through our radio organizations, through training from somebody who comes in, whether they're 15 or whether they're 65, do exist. Our network offers training from someone who has no knowledge. Often they're from communities that come from outside of Canada and are settling here in Canada, bringing their own languages as well. So there's often even that separation of knowledge and ability. Where we are seeing the shift is the formalized structures and steps in which people are able to go through post-secondary education. So close to 2/3 of the journalism and the broadcasting schools have closed in Canada. And what we've seen then is the inability for people who are interested in moving into that as a training and a formalized process to go through. Now, there's obviously a blend of nonprofits, professional groups, mentorships, and so on that are available, but that core pathway has been impacted dramatically over the last 6 months to a year.
In an article you wrote earlier this month with Bay Today, you state that, and I quote, "In many of the campus and community radio stations, and especially the Indigenous ones, they're often the only source of information and news in those spaces, let alone a spot for people to share their passion and learn as an entry level into the media. If this is the case, should they still be treated as training grounds and cultural platforms, or should they now be understood as essential local news infrastructure?"
And we've argued that it's part of a broad connection, right? So community radio as a whole has shifted more towards a community media platform. So this means that as people are entering, whether it's they want to do a radio show or a podcast or learn how to produce a content or a web series or community events or learning how to run an organization. The connections that these stations make spread beyond broadcasting over AM or FM, and they're usually integrated directly into the way that the organizations work. So campus radio stations is a good example. A lot of the time, professors are working with students to learn how to do this type of media sharing of stories as opposed to writing their 5th essay. In Indigenous spaces, there are often communities where you're not able to have generalized communications in some spaces. So using the airwaves is not your traditional, you turn it on, you listen to the morning show. It might only be on a couple of times throughout the week, but they're there for important information, whether it's reaching people who are out hunting and trapping, emergency services and whatnot. So the breadth of what these stations do has really expanded dramatically. And yes, the training and education is one part of it, but we're also looking at access to news. We're talking about access to advertising for local businesses, and music is still a huge portion of what we do.
Fantastic. Mr. Desjardins, I turn to you for my last question for this round. Time and again in this committee, we've heard about changes and rapid changes at that, technological advancements, consumer behaviors, consumer habits. And in previous studies, I've made a point of highlighting the importance of future-proofing legislation, ensuring that dialogue is active and that we're engaging industry at large. How do you find we can most effectively as a government consistently maintain these rapports with industry, make sure that they are feeding into the legislative process beyond these committees, which I've heard folks feel they come to every 3 years or so and highlight the same frustrations over again.
I would say over the last several years that we've had a good exchange with the government, with members of the opposition parties, just in terms of being able to convey the challenges that our members are facing and the ways that those could be addressed. There's another player within this that is the CRTC, which implements this legislation, and I think that we've stated that we would like to see the commission both move faster and be willing to take an approach that doesn't look at chiseling regulation into granite, understanding that with rapid changes within the media industry that they need to be able to certainly look ahead to understand that and to use their term to make sure that they get it right, but to be willing to come back and revisit and get it right again when they need to, as change dictates so.
Thank you. Je donne la parole maintenant.
I give the floor to Mr. Champoux now for 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I will begin by speaking to Ms. Dickinson to express my great disappointment to see that you've had to cut 2 important shows from your programming. It's not the first cuts we see in the media, in news, in recent years, but it's always very, very sad to see. You spoke with my Conservative colleague about opinion journalism, and I'd like to hear your perspective on this new portrait we're seeing in the world of news with the arrival of social media, new forms of journalism, if you will. As you've said, we see opinion-based journalism, if you call it journalism. There's a lot of commentary, and people may have a hard time making the distinction between pure journalism, research, fact-checking, etc., and commentary, pundits, editorials. All of that has its place. I think we can have room for all of those types of journalism in our ecosystem. But what I'm hearing is that some benefit from that confusion to have all types of journalism, well, to say that journalism is biased. What do you think? Should we better define the types of journalism in the media we look at? Or is it okay to let people use editorials and blur them with serious reporting? So there's an impression of biased journalism with some journalists. What do you think? Thank you very much, Mr. Champoux, for the question. I don't think it's a question of labeling the type of journalism that exists now. It's about protecting the ability to do that fact-checking, whether it's for a large reporting project or something simpler on a daily basis, a podcast, whatever it is. It's really about doing that fact-checking. And what's different with CPAC, because I'm here to represent CPAC, is that there's no other institution that has that long format, all of those hours, no editing, no cuts, etc. And one of the things that's absolutely incredible, I think I said it in my opening remarks, is the number of hours we provide in our archives. So we have this big library. You don't have to talk about CPAC's mission. I support it. And I think we should look at sufficient funding based on the reality of today's market, and I hear you on that. I really wanted to make the distinction between what is journalism and what is commentary, and the perception that some people have of journalism being biased, and that doesn't serve the profession. If we want to protect quality journalism, it can be criticized, of course. We always have a right to criticize, but there's a basis to this profession, and I think we need to provide that context. Kevin Desjardins, you are a little bit like the cherry on top of the sundae here, because we've heard from a number of your association's members who've made requests, and you've echoed them today, including emergency support for your members who benefit from the ILNF. You've also talked about the tax credit for government advertising. These are things we've repeated for a long time, and we've spoken for a number of years. Kevin, I think I can call you by your first name because we know each other well, but I will still be a little bit formal in committee. Do you think there will be a result? Because we repeat things and we haven't yet seen a result. Well, I would say that I need to believe it, because to keep pushing the rock up the hill, we have to believe we'll get to the top. I think we're getting close. I don't think it's easy to get things through government, but we're starting to hear questions or acceptance of what we're going through on the government's part in terms of what types of support we need. Unfortunately, we've lost stations, journalists, services, newsrooms in the past few years since the Broadcasting Act C-10, the first version. We see progress. I think we're getting closer to what we need, but there's no celebration. This afternoon, around 4 p.m., there's an economic update. If there are measures that aren't announced, even though we've been calling for them for a long time, if the support measures for news media are not announced in the economic update, what would your reaction be tomorrow morning? What I fear is that it will send a message to some of our members that support is not coming. I hope to see something. It's been quite some time that we've been pushing on this. And so to see a little bit of progress would be very appreciated by us and by our members.
Giat, you now have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Mr. Epstein, we've heard at this committee from a group called Honest Reporting Canada that did a study saying CBC is biased against Israel in the broadcaster's coverage of the war in Gaza. You go further by saying the CBC is essentially operating as a mouthpiece for terrorists. Strong words. Can you give examples of this?
Of course, when using information provided to them by terrorists. Hamas health ministry is Hamas. The health ministry is not operated as an independent body that is unbiased, and it is operated by Hamas. All of Gaza is operated by Hamas. So when they're getting information from that part of Hamas, it is still information that's being provided by a terrorist organization, that they ignore the fact that these are the same people who are capable of beheading people with shovels to get their news information, rushing to push narratives by an organization that quite literally states that they want to annihilate the only Jewish state in the world. So this is how they work as a mouthpiece for terror.
What have you done to try to push back against this? Have you gone to CBC? Have you had meetings? Have you tried to make your case to CBC?
The CBC isn't quick to return emails. CBC is not quick to return emails, and they will operate and continue to operate in the way that they do, the language they use, the refraining from using specific words. They won't say the word terrorist anymore. Now it's militants. It continues to degrade and fall into a deeper darker, more biased news agency. It's not getting better, it's getting worse.
Why do you think that it's a danger to Canadians, this sort of treatment?
Because a lot of Canadians don't know exactly what's happening in the Middle East, just as most of us here don't know what's happening in Botswana or other countries around the world. There are many of them. There are a lot of things happening. And so when people don't, pardon me? Sorry. And when there's people who are seeing information that is specifically trying to demonize, demoralize people who are at war for their rights and their existence, that's going to shape people's attitudes and it's going to shape people's perception. This has led to the drastic explosion of anti-Semitism, hate, violence that we see on the streets. Restaurants being shot at, community centers. Police have spent tens of millions of dollars trying to maintain the anti-Semitic rallies that we see, the pro-Hamas rallies that we see. This has an effect on people who are watching, as it would anyone. If you are seeing one narrative that is bad guy over here, good guy over here, it's going to cause anger and frustration, as it would with anyone. And this is what we're seeing from the CBC and many other news outlets, that they're not reporting unbiased information. They're not reporting two sides of a story. They report one, and that's what they move forward with. And that report lends to the vilification of the Jewish community for actions that are happening thousands of miles away. There is no other community that is responsible for the actions of their foreign government. We don't see people attacking Chinese Canadians because of what China's doing. We don't see people attacking North Koreans because of their dictator. The only people in Canada that are responsible for a foreign government thousands of miles away are the Jewish community. And we see it with the violence constant on the streets and everywhere. This is what's lending to the increase of anti-Semitism.
45 seconds.
So what should be done, or what can be done to solve the issue?
A very small solution would be stop voicing the fringe, tiny groups that represent nobody in our community. The far majority of Jews are Zionists because Zionism only means the belief of self-determination on our ancestral homeland. It doesn't mean anything against anyone else. It doesn't even speak to any of those things. Zionism is a part of our religion. It's been that way for thousands of years. It's in our prayers every day where we say, Shema Israel Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. We're talking about Israel. We're talking about the yearning of returning to Jerusalem. This is not a new fabricated thing that happened 100 years ago. So the one thing we ask is stop voicing the opinion of a tiny scintilla of our community to represent the far majority. Start using organizations like Honest Reporting if you want, our position, Tafsik, B'nai B'rith. Those represent the far majority of Jews, not those small tokenized Jews who think they're standing for a cause when really all they're doing is causing further platforming those who wish us harm.
Thank you. Ms. Royer, you have the floor now for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by thanking every witness for appearing today. Yes, my mic is on. I'll focus my comments on Ms. Dickinson. You wrote to me last July, and I had the opportunity to meet with CPAC last fall. I was truly thankful for that. And I want to say how much I truly value CPAC's service to all Canadians. It is an indispensable service, as you had quoted someone that had written, an indispensable service to Canadians and journalists across our country. CPAC gives Canadians a direct window into Parliament, into our committees, public affairs, and democratic debate in English and French, often with aging, nearly impossible to replace equipment that I think you can sometimes find on eBay. And a shoestring budget of last year was $15 million. But I also want to acknowledge the people behind that work, the journalists, producers, camera crews, editors, technicians, and staff who make it all possible. And I was deeply saddened to hear the news last week about the layoffs. In a small organization, I know that is felt deeply. When CPAC has to reduce its workforce, what does that mean in practical terms for the service Canadians receive?
Thank you very much, Ms. Royer, for the supportive comments. They're greatly appreciated at this time, at any time, and for the question as well. What does it mean for the service, you asked? You know, we've had to become selective where that's difficult to do in order to make these decisions of where to cut. It was an informed-based decision. We looked at who our audience is. We look at what the top content that's being viewed, and we go back to our mission, one of public service. CPAC in no way, shape, or form is meant to be competitive. So if there is an area of duplication, that's where we opted to trim. It's not trimming fat. It's trimming really, really good content. And individuals who have had stellar careers, who are unbelievably hardworking, dedicated, it is in no way, shape, or form a reflection of their talent, their abilities, and the programming we were offering. In a time where the belts need to be tightened, the subscriber erosion has reached absolutely no heights. We were operating with the budgets that we were in 2006. Imagine yourselves, your own salaries or the budgets you're working with being frozen for 20 years. That is CPAC's reality.
Let me ask you this then. So imagine if you're sitting in my seat and you're a policymaker. What are some of the changes that you would implement, and how would you prioritize them? And are there international best practices that you might look to in that process?
It's hard to use the word prioritize. What I would look at is what is the time and place? We are seeing journalism fragilized. We've heard about radio stations being shuttered. We know of other organizations, peers, where they've shuttered their foreign bureaus. There comes a point where we need to say that journalism, above all else, and maintaining Canadian democracy matters at this time and place, because we are living through an unbelievable amount of warfare. It's not only physical warfare, it's cyber warfare. And the antidote to that, to misinformation, is information in its entirety. Making sure that we're investing in journalism in a holistic way is incredibly important. Above and beyond that, if you start putting layers versus priorities, is the public service media organizations, such as an APTN, such as an Accessible Media, such as a CPAC. They are looking at niche audiences, niche topics, and journalism all at the same time. So that would be my answer. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Je vous donne la parole maintenant pour...
Mr. Champoux, 2.5 minutes. Thank you. Australia tabled a bill. The Australian government tabled a bill to have heavier penalties against media giants, Google, TikTok, etc., which are a haven of fake news and misinformation, and young people turn to them for information. Traditional media, like here, are struggling there. So Australia has decided to roll up its sleeves and take action, contrary to other governments we need not name here. So web giants will be obliged to reach agreements with media outlets so that their content can be available on the platforms. Otherwise, there would be significant fines. It could go up to providing 2.25% of their revenue, which would go to media. What do you think, Mr. Desjardins. I'd like to ask the question of everyone, but I don't have enough time in 2.5 minutes. Perhaps everybody would like to provide their perspective, but Kevin, are you jealous to see that Australia is doing that? Well, we just saw that this morning. It follows the principle for us. When you operate in a market and you take revenue from that market, you should give back some of that revenue to support media that your company has an impact on. Beyond financial compensation, that's another topic I agree with you on, but to make news available on the platforms, to make these platforms have to provide news to counter misinformation, do you think that's something we should take inspiration from to force them to put news back online? Well, I sometimes hear that the cause of news not being on Meta's platforms is because of the government. It's absolutely because of Meta. And I think Meta, as a citizen, should be responsible. Yes. Ms. Dickinson, do you have an opinion on that? I think it's important that on digital platforms that Canadian broadcasters have a presence. There should be Canadian news and an ability in a timely fashion to change discoverability. They have the means, that's certain.
The news, c'est que dans le moment quand il faut qu'on puisse.
So when necessary, there should be a priority. There's room for CPAC on those platforms, yes. Thank you.
Et ensuite, Monsieur Généreux, je vous donne.
Mr. Généreux, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Dickinson, what is CPAC's annual budget? $15 million, and it's going down at the moment. We are receiving $13 million, not quite, at a bulk rate. Those amounts come from cable providers, yes, and satellite as well. You said earlier that you've had the same budget since 2006. Was that correct? 2006 or 2016? Well, it's back to what it was in 2006 because of the loss of subscribers. So what is the solution? You met with the committee the other day. Did you make a request for a specific amount of money? Thank you, Mr. Janitor, for that question. For years, we've been asking for a one-time amount in 2 ways. We think that within a few years, there will be a longer-term permanent solution, and that would be the Services of Exceptional Importance Fund. And that should come from Bill C-11 from the CRTC. In the meantime, we say after the cuts we've made in 2024 and 2026, we've cut 25% of our staff in 2 years. We're asking for 2 solutions. The first solution is to finish rebuilding our infrastructure because we haven't had the opportunity to do so because of the administrative renewal of the CRTC for 3 years. So we've asked for $8 million effective as soon as possible to finish rebuilding our infrastructure. Ms. Royer had given examples. We have equipment that's breaking down. It doesn't work anymore at all, whether it's for sound, etc. If you'll allow me, let me get back to my question. I don't have much time. Did you ask for an amount, a specific amount of the government? Yes, $8 million for infrastructure over 3 years, $5 million a year for our operations, so $15 million. Thank you. Okay, do you currently receive public money? We receive it for specific projects. What type of project? Well, a special on the 150th anniversary of the Supreme Court. $150,000 for 2 documentaries on the restoration of Center Block. We're also expecting for a small amount for gap financing. Okay, that answers my question. I'll get to the point as quickly as possible. I think CPAC is a public good for Canadian democracy. It is a necessity for Canadian democracy. If the amounts you currently receive only come from cable companies that are continuing to lose money, we need to find another solution so that Canadians can have access to their democracy here in Ottawa, mostly. So you can report what happens at party conventions in a neutral fashion, as you said earlier. To me, that's fundamental. I think this is an obligation on the country's part to have an independent body that promotes Canadian democracy. You talked about $5 million every year for 3 years and $8 million for your equipment. You said you have a budget of $13 million currently. This is significant in terms of an amount of money. Do you think, because we know revenue will fall for cable companies, do you think the Government of Canada, and I don't know what the answer is, do you think the Government of Canada should be funding you 100%? Should be funding CPAC's operations? I think the model is changing. We are at a turning point, and I think the government should have a responsibility, whether it's from cable companies, streamers, or the government together, to ensure our survival. So in part, yes. Radio Canada received $7 million from C11, from the Journalism Fund. Do you receive some? From C18, we receive money. 350,000, 405,000. So we receive money, but small enough sums. Thank you.
Monsieur Toumba, vous avez la parole.
Mr. Toumba, you now have 5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. Welcome to the new members. I'd like to make a comment, as my colleague Fares made earlier. It's like he read my mind and he spoke for me. We're talking about Canadian media. I think as politicians here, I think we shouldn't be interfering in what happens in newsrooms. You, media, you have an ethical, intellectual capacity to decide what you put forward and what you put on your different platforms. I could complain and say we don't talk enough about Haiti or Sudan or Chad or South Africa where there was apartheid, but that's not what we're here to do. We need to know Mr. Desjardins, Mr. Epstein, Mr. Thiessen, Mr. Rook, Ms. Dickinson. In your view, the state of the journalism and media sectors, Ms. Dickinson. An extraordinary point. There needs to be an investment at every level, whether for local news, for the independence of CPAC, for radio. We really need to rethink the whole model. Mr. Epstein?
To have all realms of positions. I think having one very left-leaning, CBC and no right-leaning news organization to the tune of over $1 billion is what's causing a lot of problems for, I think, a lot of Canadians. I think having representation for both the left and the right to start, and like you said, making sure that there is ethical journalism that's being done, because it's been lost in this country. at least from some of these news outlets.
Monsieur Desjardins.
Mr. Desjardins.
On parle souvent
We often talk about how it's important to keep journalists in newsrooms. The more journalists you have, it will contribute to more voices, more knowledge, mentorship opportunities from an editorial standpoint. So you'll find that in newsrooms, it doesn't mean that there can't be journalism that happens outside of them. But for us, I think supporting more journalists in newsrooms would answer a lot of issues. Mr. Rook and Mr. Jeff, the digital transition has allowed Canadian content to reach new people within Canada and internationally. At the same time, it has upset the economic model. How can you find a better balance between digital innovation, discoverability, and sustainable funding? Mr. Barry.
I think a lot of our stations are in the process of doing that or are doing that naturally because they are organizations that aren't sort of held to somebody else looking for something from them. Often it's shareholder value or often it's information from above sort of, speaking to this or that. Our network will go out and do the learning and the education to be able to provide those opportunities for the community to share their mind. And I think that's a really important portion of the entire process that helps with, the entire ecosphere of the Canadian media sector, which tends to lie in its own way. And the further we pull apart from what is truly Canadian and how we operate around, within the room here or on the streets, I think that's really important that the entire ecosphere have the supports that it needs in order to be able to do that work.
Monsieur Jeff, un commentaire là-dessus?
A comment from Mr. Thiessen?
Yeah, maybe just to state, as we're talking about journalism and making sure that there is balance within the system, I think that newsrooms need to just literally put the code of ethics, like the journalism standards, like in their newsroom and then evaluate those every week and make sure that that's forefront. Make sure that...
De la transition numérique.
Digital transition. I was talking about the digital transition. How can you find a better balance between digital innovation, discoverability of Canadian content, and the financial sustainability of media? That's my question.
My earphones weren't working properly. But as I understand, so digital innovation, I think that's one of the great democratic systems that we have now, is that it allows smaller stations to do so much more with that new technology. And I think of Barry and his community stations and organizations like ourselves, we don't have huge budgets, but we're able to do so much more and be able to get to so many more people because of the innovation, the opportunity we have to take our message and get it out even further than ever before. So that even though it's a difficult time and a lot of investment needed in terms of creating and taking advantage of that innovation, it allows smaller players to actually take the message out to our communities in a much better way. So yeah, it's a very important time for us.
Thank you.
Merci.
Merci, non, c'est tout.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, the time is up. Now,
Is next for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, everyone. I just want to say off the top, I really appreciate CPAC and Ms. Dickinson, your fact-based reporting. I am sorry that your 2 flagship public affairs shows are now gone. You did mention Mr. Fife, and that's kind of interesting because, as you know, I'm a longtime broadcaster. We've talked about the opinion pieces, the journalists, the commentating, the objective reporting. All he's done the last year, Mr. Fife, is go on these shows, CTV, CBC, ridicule my leader, Pierre Poilievre, calling him names, talking about our party, how many people are moving, totally garbage on the air. And this is where I think the public has just said enough. I no longer want to watch these public affairs shows with statements like that. Then I turned to the Globe and Mail the next day, and guess what? Mr. Fife has the PM giving him the lead story on the front page of Canada's national newspaper. So you can see the objective from me, 40-plus years of journalism, seeing him in the afternoon ridiculing the Conservative leader in our party, then the next morning spewing the Prime Minister and what he's going to do that day. Do you find that interesting?
I think that what it points to is the importance of CPAC so that you can actually see the full picture and, you know, above and beyond the parliamentary proceedings, that is our core business. It's the wraparound materials, all the caucuses ins and out, all the press conferences, you know, ad hoc press conferences is our leading content on YouTube and online. That's what, you know, people are coming to watch for us. On television, you know, appointment viewing is question period. So it isn't a selection that we have made. It really is what's there for the taking in its entirety. Thank you.
To be honest, Parle View is eating your lunch.
Parle View, you know, it serves a different purpose. You know, if you were to, one of the things, as many people in this room who speak both English and French, you know, I love floor language. And on CPAC, I can go from English to original, like, and be like, oh, I'm not on the original language, I'm going to hit floor sound, and it just continues. On Parle View, it stops it, and you go all the way back to the beginning. And I think more than anything, CPAC has a discoverability, purpose, and brand awareness with Canadians, with its audiences, and that 70,000 hour, have I said it yet a couple times, archives. So there you go.
Thank you for the word archives, because we are in the heritage department here. And I've seen many TV stations throw their archives in the lowest disposal. I talked about this with the minister during the Harper years. He had no idea when we did close Brandon. We had Lloydminster and Medicine Hat closing. You've talked about the archives from 1977, I believe. That is our history in this country. And unfortunately, Kevin, I think the CAB should be talking more about the archives, because I thought we had the best archives in the country at CTV. I was there for 40-plus years, and you have people coming to you say, you know, the camera was there in 1979. Do you have that touchdown? We did. But I am worried that this government doesn't care about archives. And I've seen that, Ms. Dickinson. You've mentioned archives. When you can do these specials, and it's only taking the past and putting it into the future that other Canadians can enjoy that aspect of our country. You want to comment on the archives? Because I'm really worried about this.
You know, it's one of our gems, so we can't talk about it enough. You know, we have 70,000 hours, and it's in the cloud. It keeps on growing. We contribute every single day up to 20 or 24 hours more a day. I only see that growing. So we think it's quite special. And you're right, I am aware of other broadcasters that have had to step away from their archives because it is a behemoth of a task. But CPAC protects ours because we do see it as the democratic memory of Canada.
Well, I wish you all the luck. The Service of Importance, the Servants of Importance Fund, that's a new one I've heard. What's that fund?
We're out of time for this question.
Someone else pick
thanks.
up.
Yeah, next time you can get back to that one.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Miles,
So
you have the
it's-
floor
it's
if you
okay.
wish to be led.
Yeah, no, it's
There's-
okay. We still have some time to get through some more questions. Thanks, everybody. Mr. Thiessen, great to have you here. As from MP Thomas's riding, I'm also very pleased to have Mr. Desjardins, who's from Fredericton or Mokto, the greatest riding in Canada, here with us today. Nice to have you here. Yeah, can we vote on that now? Now that we have a majority, let's vote on that one. No, listen, I appreciate y'all being here, and I think one thing that we've all been grappling with is the future of the market, not just the government supports. Maybe we can talk about, you know, some of the opportunities from a market perspective of growth, and not just decline. I mean, I know that overall the market has been very tricky, and we can talk about some of those elements. But just before we go into some of the funds and how they've affected you, maybe we can speak about the future of some of the market opportunities, particularly for radio. I'm curious, and maybe we can start with Mr. Desjardins. Merci.
Thank you very much. You know, I think that one of the things that is always a challenge for broadcasters is that our reach, the reach of our members, is still very strong. And in fact, one of the things that we're seeing is that where for decades retail sales and advertising tracked very much, you know, with advertising going to broadcasters, and it's been in the last decade that suddenly there's been a gap in between those. You know, I've had a radio operator say, you know, 100% of vehicles have the radio app basically in it. It's 89% of Canadians every week listen to the radio. There's a lot of apps that would kill to have that sort of penetration into the market. So radio remains, I think, very vital. It's, you know, and one of the things that I would say, just in terms of an important piece of innovation when it comes to news, is that as over the past decade, you started to see some of the local dailies and weeklies that were closed. A lot of radio stations took their websites and turned them from promotional websites into community news portals. So there are examples of a number of groups, you know, Arsenal in Quebec, Vista out west primarily, and Golden West, that have really invested into those community news portals. It's community news portals that exist outside of the foreign digital behemoths system. So I think that those who invested in their own digital properties have been able to withstand some of the challenges of news blocking and threats from outside the country. So that's one area where I think, you know, it's very much responding to the community and finding the tools, as Jeff said, finding the digital tools to be able to innovate and serve the community better.
And so with regards to, I mean, obviously some of that, part of the challenge is even when you have listeners showing up, it's hard to monetize if people aren't advertising there. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, and, you know, as a couple of lads from New Brunswick, with probably living within, my family came from Grand Falls and St. Stephen, two border towns. One of the things in a border town, if you were to advertise, if you owned a car lot in St. Stephen or Grand Falls, and you tried to advertise on the radio station just across the border in Maine, you would not be able to claim that as a business expense because there are rules in place that were intended always to help preserve Canadian media. When it comes to internet-based platforms, that there's a loophole there, and it has not been closed. And that is one of the things that has helped to spur all of that $11.2 billion in advertising from leaving the Canadian market. It's not to say that that people would stop advertising on digital platforms, but it is certainly an incentive for them because they do get a tax credit, a business tax credit for that business expense.
And certainly some of obviously the money going towards the states and the larger digital platforms was the impetus for C11 and C18. So maybe you can talk about your support for those bills, but also how they've changed and how maybe they're not quite living up to their capacity now and where we need to look at changing them.
We're at 5 minutes, so Come back to that question.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Monsieur Champoux, je vous donne la parole maintenant.
Mr. Shampoo, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. When you begin a career as a host or a journalist on the radio, often you go through the community model. That's where the opportunities are, and it's a very nice experience. That's what I did in the 80s. Student radio, community radio. Community radio is a good learning opportunity. Having a career in the community sector is a vocation, Mr. Rook. Could you tell me what is the state of troops in the community radio world now? Morale must be pretty low.
Yeah, morale is low, and there are challenges, especially when we're looking with younger people trying to enter the market. As noted, the closures are not providing that formal next step, and I think that has a profound impact on how we all are working with, especially as younger people are gathering information from other spaces. So what you're often seeing is, as younger people, they're looking for news and information in different ways and forms, and those aren't maybe as informed, and those are maybe more opinionated, or those are maybe skewed towards sharing to the community that is giving you likes and thanks, as opposed to providing that sort of true support and information.
Aussi l'implication dans la communauté.
Involvement in the community, it's a community group because they're really rooted in the community. What would it mean in areas where there's little media diversity to have a community outlet disappear? Aside from news, what would it mean as a consequence that we should be fearing?
Some of the big things are loss of local advertising opportunities. So many communities, these are the only spaces in which a small business has the ability to share information. Services and being brought out from municipal governments or provincial or federal offers, those disappear as people sort of don't have access to that information as easy as possible, especially in, as you said, rural, remote communities that have low broadband connections as well. The music industry, I mean, it's often in many places a meeting point in which communities come together. So they'll often offer out spaces or opportunities that wouldn't happen. Festivals or local events, they just wouldn't happen because there's no space for people to come around to make that.
Mrs. Thomas, now for 5 minutes.
Mr. Epstein, I'm curious about this. Recent data that was actually just published within the last few days gave an update with regards to anti-Semitism in Canada. And according to that data, in 2025, the number of anti-Semitic incidents hit a record high, so the most our country has ever seen. Now, today, you've given testimony to suggest that media coverage plays a role in that, in terms of how Canadians perceive the Jewish population here in Canada and how Canadians behave toward that group of people. And so I'm wondering if you can expand on the important role that media plays in terms of making sure that coverage is fair and unbiased, and if that isn't the case, what are the consequences for certain groups within our population?
I think I've already mentioned the importance of presenting information without bias, balanced information. We have not seen that. We don't see it in most media outlets in this country. Not the CTV, not City TV, not CP24, and the list goes on and on. CBC just happens to be the big guy on campus. And so when they consistently present information that is on one side of a war, it's impossible to present Canadians with the information from the other side of the war. There's never one party in a war, and when a war is started by one group against another, and then they're the ones who are vilified, it really does create a lot of animosity. But the thing that's strange is, and I mentioned this, is that the Jewish people in Canada are responsible somehow for what happens in Israel and Gaza, Israel and Hezbollah and Lebanon, Israel and the Houthis in Yemen, and it continues on and on and on. It never presents Israel as defending itself, which in every single front it has. It didn't start a war with Lebanon. Hezbollah was rocketing Israel, tens of thousands of rockets. Israel responded. CBC presents it as Israel's attacking Lebanon. The Houthis launch missiles. The Houthis in Yemen launch missiles at Israel. Nothing to do with Israel. Israel responds. And now Israel is attacking Yemen. Hamas, of course, started a war on October 7th. They started a war. They came in and they slaughtered 1,200 people. And when Israel, before Israel even lifted a finger, there were news outlets. There was one article I wish I had in front of me that said, the concern for Palestinians before Israel has responded. There wasn't even a discussion about what just happened and the fact that they had started a war. And so when it's presented in this way, we see constant vilification of one group. We see constant praise and maybe not even praise, apathy, towards another. And that doesn't mean there shouldn't be, but it needs to be presented without bias. And because of the way that we see schools, universities, professors, and of course, media outlets presenting the information that is just not complete or true in many cases. I mean, we've seen what happened. You just mentioned a 700% increase. The Jewish community is targeted more than any other ethnic community in Canada, more than anyone. And so we have to ask why. Why does that happen suddenly, right after October 7th, that the entire world decides, okay, and we can see by the influence of extremism in the media, and I mentioned schools, universities, mainstream, and so this continues, and so the suffering will continue, the hostility will continue, and I can tell you that the Jewish community is speaking very seriously about leaving Canada. Most Canadians don't even know this. Tafsik has started a Plan B initiative. And so if we're not going to be safe in Canada, we don't need to remain in Canada.
Thank you. I guess my question would be then, how does the media ensure that its coverage is in fact fair and unbiased?
By using sources that are not linked to biased terrorist organizations, by biased Jew-hating organizations, using information that's being presented by more than one side. Israel presents a lot of information. They do a lot of investigations. They present the information that CBC does not present, or they twist the words and use it in a way that somehow still vilifies the Jewish community in Israel. The voice of the Palestinian people, I think, is represented very well by CBC. We have no opposition to that. We just wish that the Jewish position and the Israeli position be also represented equally. That'll give people two sides of a story that they can then go, oh, okay, well, they were right here, but they were wrong there. And instead of they're always right, they're always wrong. And that's how animosity continues to grow in this country towards my community.
Thank you. Mr. Miles, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'd love to continue the line of questioning we were at, but unfortunately, I'm going to switch it up because I would be remiss if I didn't talk about community and campus radio stations across Canada. I was a musician for 20 years, and I saw how important these stations were in terms of being often the very first place that would take a risk and play music that wasn't getting played on other stations, like CJSW in Calgary, CJSR, CHSR in Fredericton, CKDU in Halifax, CIBL in Montreal, all these amazing stations that do have a role, particularly for emerging artists in Canada. I know that you often kind of, you exceed CanCon regulations often. How do you promote that? How does that become part of your mandate across the country? And how do you find you fit into the ultimate, like the larger ecosystem, particularly when we talk about arts and culture and the musical community in Canada?
It's a starting point for many people. It's also an ending point for a lot of people, right? So you end up getting musicians that have retired, and then they come back into going and hosting a radio show in their retirement because they just love showcasing content. And I think that's what happens a lot within our sector, which is we're the space where people get their first opportunity to get played on the air, or you have people who are not algorithms who are creating an experience of which people get to go through. So it's very rare that you hear some of the content that's being played on our stations that's really popular, reggae, blues, jazz, on more commercial radio stations, because there's just not either the capacity for it or the ability to monetize it. But what it does do is it provides that broad space to which those communities, specifically artists, have a spot to come in, make a local connection, play a local gig, bring communities together around it, and continue to grow. So it is still very much a starting point, as you said, in many spots. Yes, hopefully they can transition to generating larger revenue amounts, because royalties on radio are not what they used to be. And if that's sort of what you're looking for, fantastic. But we also have artists that love to just release their new album for their local radio station. And what they want to do is provide that community story for those individuals.
What's been the trend of listenership across community stations in the country over the last number of years, especially with obviously coming against streaming and some of the other ways that people are listening to music?
Similar, as I mentioned, we have a number of stations or groups that are trying to launch to get stations. The numbers that we've seen when we've started to do stats have grown. So pre-COVID, we've seen a doubling in the listenership. And that often is because of access to news, access to new information, people who are not wanting the algorithm to pick what they want to hear. What they want is something that's curated, that's local, that sort of speaks to them. So we're seeing a lot more of it. And the trust in what happens in community radio is often a lot higher. Our colleagues in Quebec put out a review a year or two ago, and that showed that they were the most trusted sort of news and media source across the country, and I'm happy to submit that information to the report as well. But it does speak to the fact that if you can talk to someone across the street or in the grocery store, they're looking to be able to share their story, and it becomes that community element.
And your ask to government is a slightly different ask than some of these other funds. Why have these other funds that some of the other broadcasters are accessing not available to you, and why specifically are you asking for a different ask?
Yeah, there is no core and stable funding for our sector, so CBC receives what they do. That's great. There are tax services and supports for some of the commercial broadcasters. We know that those aren't working as well. And there is no advertising that really comes through from the federal side of things. And the little bit of support and programs that come through our sector right now are often tied to something very specific. So the local journalism initiative is the nonprofit and community media opportunity that Canadian Heritage offers to hire a journalist in a news desert to make an opportunity for them to report on it. So that's available to print, to TV, and to community radio. That's not a service that's available to the commercial broadcasters. And some of the funds that we are hoping for, same with the commercial broadcasters, are tied up in court cases that are still holding on from decisions that were made 3 years ago.
Thank you.
We're going to move into our fourth round, starting with Mrs. Thomas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and again, thank you to our witnesses for being here. Unfortunately, I do have to take a slight deviation and turn my attention to some committee business. Just given the protocols of the House of Commons, this is the opportunity to do that. So my apologies to the witnesses. First off, I do have a question of clarification to the clerk. We just received notification that the minister is no longer coming on Tuesday, May 5th, but rather is coming on Thursday, May 7th. I just want to confirm that that is, in fact, the case.
That is the information we got from the clerk today. Also, I will add that he's coming on the main estimates and will appear later on this study.
Okay.
Also.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So that was going to be my second question is, do we have confirmation from the minister that he will, in fact, appear with regards to the study on fairness in the media?
Yes.
Okay.
We don't have a date, but he has indicated that he will appear in May or June on this study.
Okay. I'll just voice my concern there. This study is coming to a close fairly soon here, and as a part of the motion, the minister has been requested to come. So the longer we wait, the longer it will take us to be able to close out this study and draft the report. And so, of course, it would be preferable that the minister come, for sure by the end of May, if at all possible. I realize those at this table don't control the minister's schedule, but just to convey the importance of that. Thank you. At this time, I wish to move a motion, and it has been sent out to all the members of this committee, and the motion reads as follows: that the committee undertake a study of no less than 7 meetings on the distribution, impact, and efficiency of Department of Heritage funding, that the committee invite the Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture to testify before the committee in relation to the study for no less than 2 hours individually, and that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House. I would move this motion for discussion at this point in time.
Mr. Miles?
Just to speak to that motion for a moment, I know I'm aware of the fact that we have witnesses here. I'm happy to chat about it. I think that the idea of asking the minister to come for another 2 hours is, he might as well set up a little permanent seat here if he's coming for 4 hours in the next little while. We're getting, it's a bit ridiculous, but anyways, I am happy to discuss this. I don't think this is the time to discuss this. We have a meeting on Tuesday where we're talking about committee business. I'd be happy to speak about it then. So I would move to adjourn the debate.
That is a dilatory motion, so we need to vote on that before I take more speakers.
Monsieur Al-Soud.
Oui.
Madame Auguste.
Oui.
Mrs. Ertl.
Yes.
Mr. Miles.
Yes.
Mr. Natumba.
Yes. Yes.
Mrs. Royer.
Oui.
Mr. Diot. Monsieur Généreux.
No.
Mrs. Thomas.
No.
Mr. Waugh.
No.
Monsieur Champoux.
No.
So motion is carried. A debate on that motion adjourned. You still have time for questions, and you still have the floor. Mrs. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would seek to move another motion that is currently tabled and therefore before everyone in this committee. And that motion reads as follows: that the committee undertake a study of no less than 6 meetings on the effect of construction and expropriations related to the Alto High-Speed Rail project, their impact on natural, cultural, and historical sites. That the committee give priority to this study upon the conclusion of the study agreed to by the committee on January 26, 2026. That the committee invite the Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture, the Minister of Transport, and the Minister of Environment, Climate Change, and Nature to testify before the committee in relation to the study for no less than 2 hours, each individually, and that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House. Chair, I would add 2 notes that I think are worth attention here. On both of these motions, it has been acknowledged that the study we're currently doing, of course, takes precedence in terms of wrapping that up. And then there's another study that we have a gentleman's agreement on to undertake next, which has been put forward by the Liberal Party. And so I am not asking that these motions would take place this spring. In fact, they probably wouldn't take place until September or October of next year. And so to Mr. Miles' point, the minister wouldn't need to camp out here. It's quite okay. It wouldn't happen until October. That he would be asked to come. So he would have plenty of time to prepare, plenty of opportunity to rest over the summer before we would ask him to appear. So just want to make sure that that is clear. I'm not asking that these would take precedence over the motions that are currently agreed to at this study, but I am asking that they would be considered for study following the ones that we have currently agreed to on the agenda.
Okay. We do have motion notices of these motions. I'm not certain that this last one is relevant to this committee, but I've got Mr. Champoux is on the speaking list next.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The first thing I want to see is yesterday we saw with the new majority that the governing side has, how they're using the majority. Yesterday in the House, there was a denial of democracy to impose a topic that could have been a subject of constructive discussion. The government said it wanted to act collaboratively with the opposition parties yesterday demonstrated the opposite. Today, we're at committee with a new membership due to the vote imposed yesterday on the House, and the first thing the Liberals do when a motion is tabled is adjourn debate. Adjourning debate is also a denial of democracy because it prevents parliamentarians from debating something that is not even a divisive topic. It has to do with the committee's work. I'm talking about the previous motion tabled by Ms. Thomas. It would have been healthy to have a conversation on it. Ms. Thomas would have been able to explain that it was not urgent, that her motion could have been studied in the fall, that there was no timeline set in the motion, and the first reaction by the Liberals has been to adjourn debate on the motion. If that's what we'll have in the future with this new committee membership, I'm extremely disappointed. I've been on the Heritage Committee for 7 years. It's been extremely tense. Ms. Thomas can speak to it. We've been opposed on a number of topics, but for quite some time we've been working collaboratively, and it makes things move forward. We look at media, culture. We have extremely different opinions very often, but we always find a way to have people's voices heard at committee. And I think it's very sad to see that this is the path the Liberals plan to take, to control the narrative, control debate, control the topics. If that's where we're headed, we're not the only ones who will be very disappointed. The sectors we represent will be disappointed as well, and it's already being heard. I've already had conversations with people who are asking if it's always going to be like this. They're not necessarily satisfied with everything the government is doing. They want opposition parties to have a voice and to be heard. So you can savor your new monarchy at parliamentary committees, colleagues, but we serve citizens. Conversations put forward by opposition parties are often full of goodwill, often very relevant, and I think it would be unfortunate to have things change, the tone change here. I was very much in agreement on the first motion. On the second, yes, there will be consequences on cultural sectors where there would be the high-speed train. So I think it would be relevant to discuss this motion and to look at having a study on it. It's timely, it's relevant, and there are people in those sectors who are very concerned. People in cultural sectors, those who put on festivals, who have cultural sites, who feel threatened, and who want us to hear from them. They want us to hear their concerns. So I would invite Mr. Miles to reconsider his strategy of adjourning debate on motions tabled by the opposition, and maybe consider that we could have the study a little bit later in the fall, perhaps, when we have the opportunity. I think it's important that we put it on the table and we remember that we have a habit of working collaboratively at this committee especially. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Miles. I agree entirely. I'm very glad that we work together. I think we've worked together very well to date. I said it was because we had witnesses here. We have witnesses here. We have the opportunity to ask questions. We also have a meeting on Tuesday to discuss committee business, and that is why I said it would be worth adjourning the debate for now. We'll pick it up on Tuesday. I agree. And I hope we will continue to work together. You know well that it's how I like to work. But right now we have witnesses here, and this is an important discussion. So I will move to adjourn the debate, and we will continue on Tuesday.
Monsieur Alsud?
Oui.
Madame Auguste?
Oui.
Mrs. Ertel?
Yes.
Mr. Miles?
Oui.
Monsieur Nutumba?
Oui.
Mrs. Royer?
Oui.
Mr. Diat?
No.
Monsieur Généreux?
No.
Mrs. Thomas? Mr. Waugh?
No.
Monsieur Champoux?
So motion carried. Mrs. Thomas.
Thank you. Given that Tuesday is a business meeting, and we just received notice of this literally less than an hour ago, I'm wondering if the clerk, or if the chair, would agree to provide us with an agenda for that meeting so that we know that what we're stepping into rather than coming into it blind.
There is no agenda at this point, but we can provide one before Tuesday. I'll work with the clerk.
Okay.
Mrs. Thomas?
Sorry, I always get a little bit panicked when I hear that a meeting is being called, but there's no agenda. So is there a purpose for this meeting?
Sorry, I don't have agenda, but yes, we spoke about, it's about future business. So it's open table about what we will study and what our schedule will look like going forward at this committee. Mrs. Thomas?
Sure. As has been agreed at this table, generally there's a working group that gets together and makes that decision. It's composed of 3 members of parliament, one from each party. I'm just curious as to why that practice is not being engaged in, and instead the entire committee is being invited to the table.
We could do it either way if the committee would prefer just having a subcommittee meeting. Mr. Champoux?
La pratique, Madame la Présidente, c'est...
The practice, Madam Chair, is to have the steering committee that would discuss the agenda for future work, and it's submitted to the rest of the committee, which decides, and there's a vote on the proposal. That's the usual practice. That's the committee tradition, and I think that's how it should happen.
We've done it both ways, where we've started with subcommittee and where we've taken the whole committee together in a business meeting. But if members prefer to just have a subcommittee meeting on Tuesday, I'm okay with that. Any other thoughts? Yep, Mr. Al-Sood?
Chair, I'm amenable to either option. I think everyone on this side is as well. So if a subcommittee meeting is preferred, I think that's perfectly fine. But I do think that it's important that we as a committee come together and have open discussions on what we want to discuss as business. Everyone's put forward motions. Everyone's got priorities. Everyone cares about different things. I find that when we have these conversations as a group together, everyone at the table, that tone of collaborativeness is struck completely differently. So if a subcommittee meeting is what we'd like, I'm perfectly comfortable with that. I just find that perhaps a more open, candid discussion between all the members of this committee together would probably be more productive to the benefit of Canadians.
And that's how we made it work before, but I'm open to making it a subcommittee member meeting only. But do we need to revise the membership of the subcommittee group now that we have a different membership of the entire committee? It's not like we're voting. Mr. Champoux?
Non, la coutume, c'est d'avoir un...
No, the practice is to have one representative per party. Usually it's the vice chairs, the chair, and a representative of the government party. It's not by Pareda, but as Mr. Al-Sood was saying, the decisions made are not final decisions. They're submitted to a group discussion. It just simplifies the discussion. Each party arrives with a condensed version of expectations from their side, and then they're discussed at the subcommittee. I think that's the nimblest way to operate.
Will Mr. Dumba?
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair, I just want to say we have witnesses. We should have finished our questions with witnesses to conclude the study portion. And as Mr. Miles said, we have Tuesday to discuss things. So if my colleagues have questions for the witnesses, we could ask them to the experts who are with us. What do you think?
Well, let's deal with what is at hand here. So we can change Tuesday's meeting to a subcommittee meeting if that's what members prefer. I'm fine with that. Do we need 2 hours for a subcommittee meeting?
If we're efficient, then...
Mr. Champoux?
C'est difficile de prévoir.
It's difficult to predict in advance, but usually 1 hour is enough. But we have 2 hours that are available, so I would keep the 2 hours, and we might just use half.
So if we schedule the first hour with subcommittee, second hour committee as a whole to discuss what the subcommittee has decided, everybody comes in for the second hour, does that work? Okay, so I will have the clerk revise the invitation for Tuesday. We'll do 1 hour of subcommittee meeting and then 1 hour in camera so the entire committee can discuss. Okay, sounds good. I don't believe we have more time for witness discussions today. Thank you all for your input and for your time today. If there's anything that you didn't manage to get on the record, please send us your thoughts through the clerk and we can include them in our analysis and our final study on this topic. Thank you everyone again for your time. Meeting adjourned.